Brodie, you talked so much about the attributes that you really liked in Carlos Beltran when you started to get to know him a little bit. Overall, though, this is the first time you went out and looked for a manager and chose a manager. What were the specific things that you were seeking out during this process?
Well, I think first and foremost, we wanted a leader. We wanted someone who could help coach the coaches and help coach the players and provide an environment where the players feel supported and an environment where players feel like they have an opportunity not just to get better, but that they're looking for ways to beat the opposing team.
When you mentioned the people you spoke with, you have a couple of advisors that know Carlos really well, Allard Baird, Omar Minaya. How early did they start to push him as a potential candidate, and what are the types of things that they said about him, knowing him for as long as they have?
Well, we reached out to Brian Cashman early in the process. I think the first week or the first 5 or 6 days that we started our launch, and Allard and Omar had history with him. The ownership group had history with him. We did a lot of diligence. I talked to a lot of players, talked to a lot of club executives to learn more about Carlos as the man. Obviously, we knew about him as a player, and Allard and Omar have seen his evolution in both of those areas as a player and as a man. And I think that he was a target. Ironically, going back, I looked at my first presentation when I was interviewing for my job, and Carlos Beltran was starred as one of the people that I wanted to try to bring in the organization to round out our team. And now he's obviously doing that in a pretty significant way.
Yeah, you've talked about him as a man and his evolution. You said that was a word that Carlos brought up quite a bit throughout the process. What have you been impressed with from what you've heard in terms of his evolution? What is one area where you said he's evolved to this point where he can take on this challenge without any managerial coaching experience?
Well, I think he started out as a young player from Puerto Rico, got to the big leagues, had tremendous success, went from a small market to a playoff run in Houston to the biggest market in the world in front of the best fans in the world, and experienced adversity. People forget how much success he had here with the Mets because of some of the moments that he overcame. I think as a player and most importantly as a man in the dugout, what we learned is that Carlos evolved not just to being a great player, but at the end of his career, a bench player and a mentor. And I think what we learned also is that Carlos does focus on the details. He focuses on not just his preparation to get a hit, but how he can exploit the weaknesses of his, of the teams that he's playing. And I think those were the areas that really came across to us during our process. And it wasn't just a man with great talent. It was a person who had perspective on how to approach the game and how to capitalize on on others.
Brodie, Carlos, if you look at the numbers, has had one of the best Mets careers of any position player ever. Does that make this hire easier or more difficult? And what I mean by that is, does it make it easier bringing in a guy that clearly knows the organization, was popular amongst the fan base? Does it make it easier to bring him in, or knowing that it could go one of two ways, is there a hesitancy to it?
Yeah, Steve, I think that's a good point, because of all the candidates, being in New York is different. And understanding the pressures that exist for a player that comes to New York is important. Edwin Diaz, Robinson Cano came here with high expectations. Carlos did the same. So very few people can understand what that means as a player. I think Carlos clearly understands what it's like to have a media scrum every day, and I think Carlos also understands what it feels like to win. This team had success while Carlos was here. He had success in New York, and I think those are things that he definitely doesn't want to change. He wants to continue that narrative.
As a first-time manager, obviously a strong coaching staff around Carlos is imperative. The name Terry Collins has been floated about quite a bit as a potential bench coach. Is he someone that is on the radar for you guys with Beltran?
Well, today's day one, so we're going to sit with Carlos and we're going to go over candidates. We're going to go over people that we think complement his skill sets well. But our goal is pretty simple. We want to get the best people, and we'll be as thorough with the coaching process as we were with the manager search, and we'll make sure that Carlos has strong input in trying to put people around him that he feels comfortable with, and that bring what he wants to the coaching staff.
You say this is day one. Clearly, it was the number one thing that you guys had to do to start to move forward in your offseason. As you look ahead to this offseason, though, what are the one or two areas that you feel need to be improved on the field?
Well, I think first and foremost, we want to make sure that from a player development standpoint, all the players that had great years last year continue to take this off season with a strong commitment to being even better next year. We want the same players, other players that struggled this past offseason with injuries and others to make sure that this offseason becomes a priority. But as we look at the Major League Club, you always want to get better. You always want to be creative in terms of how we utilize resources. And I think that we'd love to create a little bit more depth in our starting pitching. We've got some great players in Seth Lugo and Robert Kesselman that may be considerations in the rotation. And then ultimately we're going to try to supplement our strengths and our weaknesses. Could we get better defensively? Sure. Can we fortify the bullpen? Those are things we'll look to do in a creative way.
You mentioned the starting rotation, and from the outside looking in anyway, you see the starting rotation, see maybe third base as an opportunity to continue to improve. There are some big names on the free agent market, whether it's an Anthony Rendon or Garrett Cole, Steven Strasburg now. Are those players that you could see yourself targeting, or, as you said, are you looking more depth supplementing those spots this year?
We won't rule anything out. I think as people saw last year is that we were open-minded to a lot of different things. I think third base is a position that Jeff McNeil played very well last year. I think we'll see a lot of his time allocated to third base. I think J.D. Davis played third base and left field last year. I think we're going to try to look to improve our defense. Now, where and how we do that, is going to be the questions that we have to answer. But, we'll keep an open mind, and depending on how everything settles, we'll see if we can improve.
Brodie, thanks as always for the time.
All right, thanks, Steve.